Welcome to the UK Travel Planning Podcast. Your host is the founder of the UK Travel Planning website, Tracy Collins. In this podcast, Tracy shares destination guides, travel tips, and itinerary ideas, as well as interviews with a variety of guests who share their knowledge and experience of UK travel to help you plan your perfect UK vacation. Join us as we explore the UK from cosmopolitan cities to quaint villages, from historic castles to beautiful islands, and from the picturesque countryside to seaside towns.
Hi and welcome to episode 125 of the UK Travel Planning Podcast. So this week we are here talking all about our trip to Skye. So if you listened to last week's episode where we talked about Belfast, and episode 119 where we went through our entire 2.5 week itinerary around the UK, then you'll know that Doug and I recently did a trip. Basically, we went all the way from Birmingham to Cardiff to Chester, over to Dublin, from Dublin to Belfast, Belfast, Glasgow, Glasgow, Edinburgh, and from Edinburgh went to Skye. So we're trying to cover certain parts of that trip in a little bit more detail. And one of those is Skye, because we know that Isle of Skye is one of the most popular destinations for people to head to. So this week, Doug's here again.
Hello.
Because we're going to talk a little bit with you about what we did. As I said, we know that Skye is extremely popular. So my intention, or our intention in this episode, is to talk kind of briefly over what we did, how we got over there, a little bit about what we did, and then to share some tips, because I think that's probably really vitally important. So if you're planning to visit Skye, do hang on till the end of the episode so you get those top tips, things you need to know before you go to Skye. Yep, does that sound good?
It sounds great.
Okay, so the first thing we did, let's just say that we stayed in Mallaig overnight because we decided that we wanted to take the ferry over to Armadale.
We did, and we arrived on a beautiful sunny day.
We did.
We arrived in Armadale at about 12:15. We'd pre-booked the ferry. Obviously, couldn't give them a car registration number, but there's a part on the bookings just saying we don't know the registration number just yet.
But it's really easy, honestly.
Very easy.
I know people say that it's that they can find it a bit nervous, and we've done it before. But again, it's all very, very well organised, very easy. It's a really short, it's not a very long crossing. Again, we were very lucky. Actually, the weather was very calm, but you've got some beautiful views as well on the way over to Skye. So we arrived at Armadale, and then we had a couple of hours drive to our accommodation.
We did. We kept stopping off here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah, because the views are just gorgeous.
Nice. We'll stop there. We took a picnic as well with us.
Yeah, we did. We bought some food in Fort William, so we were able to sit and have a picnic and just enjoy the views. And again, in the show notes, you'll see some of the photos that we took, and just how beautiful it was.
Yeah, we did. Then we stopped off at the Quiraing Bridge. Get the pictures, photos of that.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, there's just so many places. You're blown away with just how gorgeous it is. But I will also say we had the most incredible weather that I think Skye's ever had. We just had, honestly, we were there for 4 days and we had 3 days of perfection, absolute perfection. Beautiful blue skies, sunshine. It was wonderful. So basically the first day, I guess, if you want to consider it that, the travelling day, we catching the ferry over, driving to our accommodation. So we decided we'd stay in pods. Now, we've stayed in pods before in Scotland, haven't we?
We have once before, and we thoroughly enjoyed it, didn't we?
So that's what we decided to do. So if you've never stayed in a pod before, I would head over to the show notes and have a look. And also on our Instagram, you'll see pictures there of the pod that we stayed at, the Kilmaluag Pod in Edinbane. So pods, that's where we stayed.
I did.
Loved it. Absolutely loved it.
And we have an additional reason for staying there, because last time we visited Skye, we had several meals at the Edinbane Inn.
We did, and we loved them.
And we did. So we decided we're going to visit there again. So we booked in for dinner. We pre-booked that, so we booked in there for about 6:00.
Yes, we did. So I think it was about 6:30 actually, and I that is kind of one of the tips. So we're kind of giving that away a little bit early, but that's one of the things that you really need to do if you're going to Skye, because it's so popular that you need to book ahead. But I will kind of probably repeat that at the end. So I had booked ahead our dinner. So we arrived on Skye, went to our accommodation, leisurely drive, had taken a picnic with us, so we had some food with us. We arrived at our accommodation. The pods are around about sort of 3:00. chilled out, unpacked everything, enjoyed the weather, enjoyed the views, and then just had a leisurely stroll down to Edinbane Inn for dinner. So basically the first full day of our itinerary, I guess, if you can take away that day that we're travelling over and getting settled, was basically Friday. It was a Friday and we had a full day. This was a kind of full busy day, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. But we planned the day out, and when we left our pod in the morning, it was lovely, clear skies, sun was shining.
It was. Actually, it's a Saturday morning. I'm getting the day wrong. Yeah, it was a Saturday morning. So the weather was absolutely beautiful. However, what was really interesting, what we hadn't counted on, is when we kind of got round the headland from where we were and drove a little bit, that there was a lot of mist.
We're heading to the Quiraing.
Yeah.
And we hit thick mist, thick fog.
Well, we wanted to go to the Ferry Glen, which was on the way, but we had to basically give that a skip because it was far too misty. So we actually ended up sitting in the car in a little side lane for about, 30, 40 minutes or so, waiting for the sun to burn the mist off. Because honestly, you didn't really want to be driving on those roads because honestly, you couldn't see anything for the start off because it was so foggy.
It was. I should point out we were actually off the road. We were not parked up on a passing point.
Yeah.
Because it's a single track road, so you do not park up in those.
No, we weren't. It was a proper parking space. So we parked up there, and then we kind of hung on until the mist went, and then we went to the Quiraing, didn't we?
We did. The mist cleared about midday, which was pretty much exactly what the weather forecast said.
It did say that, yeah.
And then we arrived there, and that's a paid car park down the Quiraing, which we paid with contactless, and then the views.
Absolutely stunning. It is absolutely everything that you'll have seen if you've seen the pictures of it, and it is absolutely highly worth going. But I am going to say parking was a nightmare. We were very lucky that we got parking. I mean, this is the kind of middle end of September, so it was still incredibly, incredibly busy. We spent, about 40 minutes there, I would say?
I would say something.
Yeah, again, paid parking with contactless, and then we headed from there down to Staffin Beach, because the actual tide was out, which meant we could see the dinosaur footprint.
And I should point out we drove down there in sunshine again.
Yeah, beautiful.
But whilst we were on that beach at Staffin, the mist started rolling again.
It did. It was actually quite eerie, actually. And also what was interesting is even though it was pretty chilly, I mean, it was sunny, but it was chilly, there were plenty of people cold water swimming. Hats off to you guys, because that's not something I would want to do.
No.
Again, lucky to get parking. And then from there, we went to Kilt Rock to see Milt Falls. Now, I would highly recommend that you look at the show notes for this picture because it was amazing. It was like the mist rolled in and kind of met the waterfall with a rainbow. Which was incredible, absolutely incredible. So that was probably only a 5-minute stop. Now, by this point, I really needed the toilet.
You really did.
And there's not many toilets. So we were heading then, we're thinking, well, we're trying to find on Google, trying to find toilets, but we're struggling a bit, weren't we?
We were struggling. Yeah, that's right. We went somewhere because the map had told us they were open to the public.
But they weren't.
But they were not.
So we're kind of looking at thinking, all right, where we're going to find toilets. Now we're heading at this point to the Old Manor store, and luckily there are toilets there.
That's right, yeah. The car park was pretty full, but we managed to park pretty easily, and that's a paid car park there as well.
Again, all contactless, paid car park, very, very busy. A lot of people walking up to the Old Manor store. We didn't walk all the way, so hands up again, I'm not a hiker.
No, we walked about 20 minutes, half an hour on a path, and that wasn't continuous walking. We're stopping off, taking photos. And that's, again,
a pretty uphill. There's different routes you can take on that one as well.
I think the blue route is the hardest one there.
Yeah, so take water. If you're there in summer, make sure you've got a hat, sun cream, all that sort of. Think about all those things in your footwear for doing these sort of hikes. To be honest, you really need to think about that. And then after that, we headed to Portree.
We did, and that road was incredibly busy.
Yes, it was.
It was really, really busy, and got to pay attention.
I think Skye was very busy, and I know we had seen a lot on social media in the weeks leading up to going to Skye just how busy it has become. It's become a bit of a victim of its own success in that we'd seen pictures of the ferry pools. Now, we did not include the ferry pools this time in our itinerary because we'd seen pictures of the roads, and there'd been a lot of rain in Skye up until the time we were there. I mean, we're lucky that it didn't rain at all when we were there, but there had been months and months of rain, so they knew there was a lot of mud. So that we had kind of knocked that on the head, but we had been there on a previous visit. So that was a full day and a lot of driving for you, a lot of concentration for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, and as we were driving back, we thought we'll try the Ferry Glen again, but by this time the mist was again rolling in, so we pulled the plug on that one and decided to leave it till the following day.
Yeah, so I think we just grabbed a meal from the co-op, didn't we, that night? Something really straightforward and easy back tab at the pod. So that's what we did. Yeah. So then the Sunday, so this is our second full day, we had booked a roast dinner. Again, you must book. And we booked at the Edinbane Inn because we know they do a fabulous Sunday roast, which we thoroughly enjoyed. So thank you very much to the Edinbane Inn for just having fabulous food.
Really so that's the morning. We took it easy for a couple of hours. We had a tour around the village itself.
Yeah, we did.
Photos of the Edinbane Inn and the Edinbane Lodge, which is nearby, and just generally took it easy. Sat outside with. We were actually talking to the owners of the pods for hours and making a fuss of their dogs.
It was lovely. Really relaxing Sunday morning, which is what you want before, going and having your roasted dinner, traditional Sunday roast dinner. Yeah. So that afternoon we decided we would go and try and see the Ferry Glen because we knew we weren't going to be able to fit it in the next day. So that's what we did, didn't we?
We did, and that was actually turned out to be part of the best time because we got there, the car park was only about half full.
Yeah.
It's a paid park
again
as well. And we had a nice little stroll around there, didn't we?
We did. Actually, it's quite steep though, and I mean it's steeper than you think getting up to that Ferry Glen. I was a bit surprised actually because the last time we'd been, I'd sat in the car because the weather was so bad, and I was quite amazed that where you had actually walked up to in that weather because it is quite steep. Yeah, I can imagine. I really can imagine. So you really need to take your time if you. It's not, and I don't think it's easy. I don't think it's massively accessible. Yeah, there were times where I thought it was a bit slippery. And I would not say that they're very accessible.
No, but there's an alternative way, which is the sort of less steep. It's a little bit longer, but still.
If it had been raining and it was muddy, I wouldn't recommend it at all because I think it would be too slippery.
Yes, the views are worth it. The views are nice when you get there.
Yeah. So we did that. And then after that, we went to Dunvegan Castle. Now, again, I'm going to say we wouldn't generally not recommend doing this because we went from kind of one side of the island over to the other side of the island.
Past through Edinbane.
Edinbane again. Yeah. But it was the only way we could fit this in because of the day before not being able to do the Ferry Glen.
So it was about 40 minutes drive from the Ferry Glen to Dunvegan Castle.
We didn't actually go in the castle this time. We had last time. Yeah. This time we just bought the ticket for the gardens. You can actually buy the castle and gardens or just the gardens themselves. And we decided to have a stroll around. The walled garden is beautiful, isn't it? It's lovely. Yeah. So that was really nice. Again, we actually got there I think it was shutting at 5:30. So we got there around 4, I think. Yeah. Which was actually enough time just to have a stroll around and kind of enjoy it, wasn't it?
That's right. The gardens are probably slightly past the best, sort of late season.
Yeah.
But, it was still beautiful.
So that was a nice, lovely day out, wasn't it?
It was. We got back to the pod about 6:00 in the evening and we sat outside in the sun.
Yeah, just relaxing and enjoying it. So it was really good. So the Monday was going to be our last full day. So I'm saying this is a kind of 4-day itinerary, but I guess it's maybe 3.5 if you kind of consider the getting over onto Skye itself. So on the Monday, we decided to go to Neist Point.
Hi, it's Tracy here. Just popping in to say, if you're enjoying the UK Travel Planning Podcast, I have some exciting news. Why not join us on the Global Travel Planning Podcast, where we bring you travel inspiration, itinerary ideas, real-life adventures, and practical tips to make your travel dreams a reality. We've already explored Japan, Vietnam, Queensland, and Switzerland, with more thrilling destinations coming up. So tune in on your favourite podcast app and embark on a global adventure with us.
That's right, on the Neist Point, that's over on the west side. So you're going towards Dunvegan Castle, but then heading down towards right on the coastal area there.
Yeah, beautiful. Again, stunning scenery.
Total contrast to when we were there in June before.
Yeah.
That time it was wet and rainy and...
So it wasn't sunny, but it was still. It was absolutely still. There was not a breath of wind that day. Yeah. So that's an interesting drive, but Doug's going to talk a little bit more about driving on Skye. Yeah. But that's quite an interesting drive to get to Neist Point.
I'll give you some tips about that, but suffice to say, it's a single track road, lots of bends, blind summits, people driving in the opposite direction, coming straight towards you. So, you've got to take your time. So I'll give you some tips on that. later.
Yeah, and then from there we decided to go for lunch to the oyster shed, which had been highly recommended to us. My daughter in particular was like, "Have you been to the oyster shed yet?" So we did go, had a lovely lunch there, and then after lunch we headed down to the Talisker distillery.
We did, and it's a whiskey I used to enjoy drinking, that one, but I no longer drink, so
yeah,
I enjoy being. That's why I bought a hat instead.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, so if you're not going to drink, buy a hat.
Yeah, that's Doug's thing.
But it was a lovely drive down that coastline to that whole area.
Yeah,
it was beautiful.
Yeah, it is lovely. And then we just headed back to Portree, I think.
We did, and we've got some, filled with petrol and some supplies and that sort of thing, and then back to the pod.
Yeah, and then the next day, so the Tuesday, we were driving over to Inverness. Now, this is when the weather broke, so we actually ended up with pouring down rain. Now, guess one of the tips that I'm going to say is probably what we did. So we actually went back onto the mainland over the Skye Bridge. So I guess we could probably cover the tips now. What do you reckon?
We could do, yeah. So we're heading to the Cardiff coast that point.
Yeah.
So the tips I would start with, number one, is be patient. You've got to be patient. You've got to know your own driving ability. You've got to drive the conditions of the road, the changing conditions of the road. But importantly, driving on the left-hand side of it, something you're not familiar with. Trippy Armo is
excellent.
Is a fascinating and really valuable tool.
Yeah, it really is. And to prepare yourself, even if you're used to driving on the left, to be perfectly honest, it's different driving conditions than most people are used to.
And signage, even if you're familiar with driving on the left.
Yes.
Different, one country, we're in Australia, they have kilometres per hour. In the UK, it's miles per hour.
And also, it's not for the faint-hearted, I would say, to be honest. I mean, I didn't drive, so I'll just put my hand up. I left that to Doug. But just navigating those single lanes, there's some quite interesting kind of drop-offs as well, because you get quite kind of cliffs, I guess, is what you want to say, maybe. But also, there's lots of, animals that can be on the road. So there were sheep around, and the potholes.
There's some very deep potholes that go all the way to Australia.
Yeah, I did feel like that.
But also, as I mentioned before, that it had some heavy rains and wet conditions before we got there. So some of the edges of the road, very, very dangerous. Some deep ruts where the mud's, it's muddy. So you've got to be very careful. We hired a sort of small SUV.
A medium size, actually. Medium-sized
SUV, which was absolutely perfect for the conditions. One other tip to mention about it is we hired it and included the sat-nav or the GPS, which was absolutely invaluable.
Yeah, it was. Absolutely.
Because sometimes, we can't get to that route, so we do this one. So we changed the routes a couple of times. But it's about being patient, being prepared, driving for the changing conditions. Like when we're on the Quiraing, we pulled over. It was thick fog.
You couldn't see. I literally couldn't see.
So, you've got the time, drive to the conditions, which is exactly what we do. We pull away off to somewhere safe and waited it out.
So give yourself plenty of time to get from A to B as well. Don't assume that you're going to, it might only be 10 miles. It's going to take me, 20 minutes. No, it might take you an hour and a half, honestly. And there was actually a lot of cars on the road.
It was.
And when you're on those single tracks, there's plenty of places to pull over, but you need to be aware all the time of, what traffic is around you and what's coming over and, who's going to pull in, so that all of that's going on.
And also what's behind you as well. So one thing I would say is, yes, I've already said it, I've said it several times, be patient, but also be very courteous to the other drivers as well. Acknowledge somebody stopped and waited for you.
So I think that's really important. So I'm just going to talk a couple of things that also, I guess, to do with when you're driving a car is, one is parking. So all of the parking places that we stopped off were contactless, so you have to pay. It's not a huge amount, but I guess it adds up when you start stopping off at all these places. But there's contactless. Getting parked, we managed to get it parked in every single place that we went. But honestly, sometimes it was a little bit we had to wait a little bit. I hate to think what it would be like in peak season. It would be incredibly, incredibly difficult. Another thing I would say is about petrol.
Yes, we had a hybrid car, so quite economical on the energy and fuel consumption. We filled up with petrol before we...
In Fort William, because we'd been told that in Mallaig, sometimes it runs out. So if you are going that route to Skye, don't wait until you're on Skye to fill up, and don't wait until you're Mallaig to fill up into Fort William.
And we know from previous visit that one particular petrol station just outside Portree on the road as we're heading out. So we knew where that one was, but also keep your eye on your fuel consumption as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing to do is, if you're heading over Skye, is to take some supplies with you. There are a couple of co-ops and some smaller shops to get supplies. But honestly, we were staying in the pod, so we had access to a fridge and little cooking facilities. But we took a couple of cool bags with food in, put those straight in the fridge, so we were sorted. So take things over with you.
We did. We more or less planned a menu in the nights and lunches we were eating out before we visited. We had it all mapped out, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. And I guess relating to kind of food as well, like I've mentioned before, make sure that you book restaurants. You have to book where you're going to eat. Now, obviously, not at the Oyster Shed. You can't book that. You just turn up and it's a takeaway. But if you want to eat in a restaurant, you need to book because it can get incredibly busy. And we got caught up that our first time there a few years ago in May, when we were looking for a place to eat, and we were told, "Oh, did you book anything?" "Oh, no." So that's something we have learned. So we're sharing that because that's really important. And I know when I got the email when we had the pod organised, the guy was like, "Make sure you book your restaurants." And when we were chatting to them, he said, "Yeah, that's one of his tips that he absolutely says to people: make sure that you do." Another thing I'm going to share as well is consider where the toilets are. Honestly, that was something that I hadn't realize just how far apart the toilets are, so there aren't a lot. Put it that way.
No, and we've already said one of the toilets you expected to be there was no longer open to the public.
Yeah,
at the campsite.
Yeah, so so I just think make sure that you've got an idea, like somewhere like a Portree, there'll be toilets, and there's toilets at Old Manor Store. I can't think where else. There was no toilets at Quiraing, no toilets at Kilt Rock that I saw, nothing on Staffin Beach that we saw. So I mean, obviously you can stop off at a cafe if you need to, but just be aware, because that was something that kind of I was like, oh dear, where's the toilets? Then I think the other thing as well is we're talking about this driving as well is trying to stick to one area, one part of the island, so you're not unnecessarily driving miles. Now we did mess up a little bit on the Sunday in that we went to the Ferry Glen and then all the way over to Dunvegan Castle, and it was literally only because we couldn't get there on the Saturday when it actually naturally fell into that going around that part of Skye. So it would have fitted into that if it hadn't been that it was so misty. I'm trying to think if there are any other things that we can think about. Oh, yes, I would say as well, if you're going to go over there, go 2 different routes. Go over on the ferry and then come back over the bridge. So you get to see different scenery, because that's amazing to see. Another thing as well is think about clothing. We were lucky that the weather was really good, but, think about your footwear. Think about layers. Think about having raincoats with you. It does rain over there quite a lot.
I wore shorts every day there.
Yeah, you did. You were very lucky. But, I mean, that was exceptional. And they did say, I think we'd had the best days of the year, just about. And then I know you mentioned about cash.
Yeah, we didn't take any, did we?
We didn't. Yeah. And we didn't need any. We used contactless the entire time. We had no issues whatsoever. I was a bit thinking, you never know sometimes with parking, but it was absolutely fine. All the shops took contactless, and we were never asked for cash at any point. Yeah. So I think that gives a kind of pretty good overview of our itinerary. Now, on the website, I have got an article about how to get from Edinburgh to Skye. I've got some information about where to stay on Skye. We've also got a Skye destination guide, and we've also got an itinerary for Skye. So there's quite a lot about Skye on the website. So, you'll be able to go into the show notes, uktravelplan.com/episode 125. And there you'll be able to find links to all those other articles, more about Skye. Yeah, I mean, we enjoy Skye. We really do. I love Scotland, so it's always a pleasure to go around. And next year, I have to say, my aim would be to see some of the other islands like Harris and Lewis, and go back to Orkney potentially, Shetland Islands. So just be aware that Skye is very busy, becoming, as I say, it's a bit of a victim of its own success, and there are other beautiful places to visit in Scotland. So you can listen to North Coast Explorer Sally Ann talk about the far north of Scotland, because that's another beautiful area to visit. North Coast 500 is fantastic, isn't it? Yes. But yeah, I think those are our tips and kind of a little bit of a summary of what we did in Skye.
Yeah.
So that's it for this week, and as always, it's happy UK travel planning.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the UK Travel Planning Podcast. As always, show notes can be found at uktravelplanning.com. If you've enjoyed the show, why not leave us feedback via text or a review on your favourite podcast app? We love to hear from you, and you never know, you may receive a shout out in a future episode. But as always, that just leaves me to say, until next week, happy UK travel planning.